At a supermarket in Tokyo, 3 people, including 2 high school girls, were killed by gunshots to the head, within a few minutes of each other. Gun laws in Japan are very strict, and therefore gun crime in general is rare, which made this case that much more shocking. Over the following decades, more than 200,000 personnel have been involved in the investigation, but the culprit was never caught, making it one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in modern Japan. This is the story of the Nanpei supermarket incident. On July 30th, 1995, the annual summer festival was being held in Hachiuji City, located in Tokyo. A young couple who was participating in this festival heard something like fireworks go off multiple times. They found it kind of odd, as fireworks were not a part of this festival, but didn't think much of it at the time. The next day they would find out on the news that 2 high school girls and a woman in her 40s were found dead in a small nearby supermarket. All 3 of them were employees of that supermarket, and had presumably been killed after the shop had closed for the day. The fireworks the couple had heard were the gunshots that led to the death of these 3 victims. On the day of the incident, the woman in her 40s, who we will refer to as Woman A, and one of the high school girls, who we will refer to as Girl B, had been working their shifts when the supermarket closed at 9 p.m. They locked the entrance and were in the process of booking their revenue for the day in a room at the back of the store, all according to everyday procedure. Also in this room was Girl C, who also worked at this supermarket, but wasn't on shift that day. She was there to wait for Girl B to finish her shift, so they could go to the summer festival together. Woman A was planning to go out to dinner with a male friend, and this male friend received a phone call from her at around 9:15 p.m., asking him to come pick her up at the store. At 9:17 p.m., gunshots are heard by multiple people in the area, most of them recalling hearing the sound 5 times or so. At 9:20 p.m., Woman A's friend arrives in the parking lot. He waited for 20 minutes, but Woman A never showed up. Although he did notice the lights were on in the back office, he knew employees often changed into uniform in that room, and didn't want to barge in on high school girls changing their clothes, which made him hesitant to go check inside the store. He considered the possibility that Woman A had gone to the restaurant herself and went there as well, but there was no sign of her. At around 10 p.m., he decides to go back and check inside the store, and to his horror, he finds the 2 girls lying in an ocean of blood, and his friend Woman A slumped against the wall, blood pouring from her head. The police are called, and an investigation of the crime scene finds that the 2 high school girls had their wrists bound to each other with duct tape, and had been gagged as well. They were both killed by headshots from close range. In contrast, Woman A was not bound. She had been pistol whipped, and killed by a shot to the forehead, followed by another shot to the head. There was also a gunshot to a safe that held money, so the total number of rounds fired was 5, which lines up with the ear witness accounts. This would mean the culprit had killed the 3 of them within the 5 minutes between 9:15 p.m., when Woman A called her friend, to 9:20 p.m., when the friend arrived in the parking lot. This includes the time required to tie up and gag the 2 girls. Footprints indicated that the culprit had walked directly to the safe upon entering the room, walked around the safe, and then headed out. Initially, the police suspected a robbery gone wrong. This supermarket had been robbed multiple times in the past, and was known to not have any kind of security. Also, the back room the victims were in was not connected to the store from the inside, so they had to carry their cash around the building, making them prime targets for someone whose objective was to steal money. There were 4 security cameras set up in and around the supermarket, but none of them were operational. However, the police found 5 million yen, roughly equivalent to $40,000 left in the safe, which was in sight from anywhere in the room. Woman A knew the combination to open this safe, but she was presumably killed without being coerced to even try to open it. The 3 victims all had their wallets on them, and there was no sign that someone had searched the room for other valuables. There was even a sticky note on a desk that had the combination to the safe, which anyone could have found if they looked around for a brief moment. So this makes it less likely that money was the main motive, unless something had gone horribly wrong and forced the culprit to run out without taking the cash. The focus of the investigation would then be put on the woman in her 40s, Woman A. For a long time she had been a lady of the night. At one point she even had her own establishment, hiring other women to work under her. She always had rumors of dating multiple men simultaneously, presumably having her boyfriends spend ludicrous amounts of money on her. However, her former peers and employees would recall her having a very fierce temper, and would often have various troubles with her clients, some of them her boyfriends at the time. She was also known to be aggressive towards people around her, and was generally disliked by her staff. These difficulties eventually forced her to close the establishment she had built. Woman A would then go on to work at this supermarket. Many people who knew Woman A and heard of this case almost immediately assumed it was done by one of her former boyfriends or affiliates, harboring some kind of resentment from past interactions with Woman A. She was the only one who had 2 shots fired into her, even though the first shot was lethal, directly to the forehead at close range. Woman A had also been telling people around her that she was recently receiving strange letters, some of them death threats, and others having a razor blade inside. The fact that a pistol was used alone makes this case stand out in Japan. Gun controls are very strict, and while it is possible to get a hunting rifle after a very long process, getting a pistol is virtually impossible. On top of that, all 3 of the victims had been shot through the head at point-blank range, without hesitation. Therefore, it was suspected that the culprit was some kind of professional, likely a member of organized crime. However, the police didn't have much to work with other than these theories. There was no security camera footage, and while some people mentioned they saw a suspicious man dressed in a white shirt, that didn't really narrow down the suspect pool. The most promising piece of solid evidence there was at the crime scene were some fingerprints on the tape that was used to tie up the victims. These fingerprints did not belong to any of the employees, and there was also some DNA that didn't match any of the employees on this tape as well. But without any suspects, the police couldn't really utilize this evidence. No arrests were made, and the investigation never really gained any momentum. One factor to consider is that the year that this incident took place, 1995, had 2 major events in Japan that shook society to its core. The first being the Hanshin earthquake, a disaster that led to the deaths of several thousand. The second was the Ohm Shinrikyo terrorist attack, one of the worst acts of domestic terrorism Japan has ever seen. These events depleted police resources, which some speculate was the reason early investigation wasn't very productive. Although no arrests were ever made regarding this incident, there have been some notable suspects and additional pieces of evidence over the years. In 2009, a pistol was confiscated from the House of Man, who was a member of organized crime. This pistol had very similar rifling marks to the bullets found at the crime scene, similar enough that the police was very confident this was the firearm used in the Nanpei incident. However, the owner of this gun had a clear alibi on the day of the incident, and he wouldn't spill the beans on how or who he got the firearm from. In the summer of the same year, a Japanese man who was arrested in China for possessing illegal drugs and was sentenced to death claimed to know the culprit of the Nanpei incident. The Japanese police was initially skeptical, as it seemed this man was just saying so as a bargaining tool to prolong his death sentence, but they decided to interrogate him anyway. The interrogations revealed that this man had indeed operated in Japan as a member of organized crime for some time, as a member of a cross-border group consisting of both Japanese and Chinese criminals. and he knew details of certain crimes committed by that group only insiders would know, so this man was legit to a certain degree. He tipped off the police that a Chinese man, who currently lives in Canada, was the perpetrator behind the Nanpei incident. It is unclear what motivated him to give this information to the Japanese police. Maybe it was some kind of last-ditch effort to have his death sentence overturned, or at least postponed, but he was executed in early 2010. As the police were chasing this lead, they also found out that the manager of supermarket Nanpei was dating a young Chinese woman at the time of the incident. He had brought her into the office a few times and had told her roughly how much money was in the safe when she jokingly asked. The manager claims this woman pretty much vanished right after the day of the incident, which makes one wonder if she had been a member of the crime group. The Japanese police eventually managed to track down the Chinese man they had been tipped off about. He had faked his identity and used a fake Japanese passport to seek refuge in Canada, where he lived with his wife. In 2013, they brought him back to Japan under the charge of forging a passport, and he was found guilty for that particular crime. However, no matter how much they grilled him, he would stay adamant that he had nothing to do with the Nanpei incident. His fingerprints didn't match those that were found at the crime scene, nor his DNA. So after receiving a suspended sentence for forging a passport, he went back to Canada in 2014, making this a dead end. On a completely separate angle, in 2015, when the police were renewing and consolidating their fingerprint database, it was found that the fingerprints from a man arrested for an unrelated crime had an extremely close match to the prints that were found in supermarket Nanpei. When police determines if fingerprints match or not, they look for certain patterns, like when lines break off into two, or when lines cross. In Japan, if there are 12 or more similarities like this in the same places, it is determined to be without a doubt fingerprints from the same person. The man in question had 8 similarities, which is extremely close but not 100%. The chance of having 8 similarities is about 1 in 100 million. So in Japan, which has a population of 130 million, there will be 2 or maybe 3 people who have 8 similarities to each other. But this was such a strong piece of evidence that the man would have been a prime suspect. However, he had died 10 years ago in 2005, so the police couldn't chase this lead either. It should be noted that DNA samples taken from this man's living relatives did not indicate that they were related to whoever left the DNA on the duct tape. So it is possible he had nothing to do with the case. But it is also possible that the DNA on the duct tape was not from the culprit. Over the years, over 200,000 personnel have been involved in some form or another in investigating this case, and the case is still open to this day, making it one of the most infamous unsolved cases in recent decades. What do you think? Was it a robbery gone wrong? Or was it more about revenge towards woman A? Do you think the culprit was the Chinese man, or the man who had similar fingerprints? Let me know in the comments below. A big thank you to Corbachu, Mick Hilvers, and my other Patreons for supporting this channel. Your support is always appreciated. And as always, thank you for watching until the end. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. I'll see you next time.